John had a wife who talked excessively, and he was very troubled by her constant chattering. When John learned that a holy monk had come to the forest, he took his wife to meet him and said, "Oh, revered monk, please counsel her. She talks too much. Even after I ask her not to, she keeps talking all day. I try to explain to her that she should learn to speak less and stay quiet, but she doesn't listen, and it leads to arguments every time." The monk smiled and said, "Let me explain this to you through a story. I had a disciple who talked extensively. He would always engage in idle conversation and never remained quiet. When he went to collect alms, he would bring back a new story from every house and share it with other disciples at the monastery. He would gossip about one disciple to another, try to appear good in front of others, constantly praise himself, and always attempt to prove himself the most intelligent and superior in front of me. He considered himself different and better than all other disciples. He would often say, 'I am from a wealthy family. If I wanted, I could live a comfortable and luxurious life. But I left all that and came here because I want to seek, to know myself, to understand life.' One day, the monk called all the disciples of the monastery and said, 'Each of you must take a vow for the next month. This will strengthen your willpower and increase your inner strength. You can take any vow according to your capability, and if anyone's vow breaks before a month, they can return to their old routine.' All disciples took vows according to their strength and left after informing the monk about their respective pledges. However, that particular disciple, who always wanted to appear different, went directly to the monk's hut and said, 'I don't want to take any small vow. I want to take a great vow worthy of someone like myself. Please tell me what vow I should take.' Hearing this, the monk smiled and said, 'Will you be able to fulfill the vow I give you? Will it be possible for you? Perhaps not. You won't be able to complete it. Therefore, find a vow yourself.' The disciple insisted, 'No, revered monk. Whatever vow you give me, I will surely fulfill it.' The monk said, 'Very well, then remain silent for the next month. Don't utter a single word. This is your vow.' The disciple said, 'Master, is this even a vow? This is too easy. Please give me a vow that matches my capabilities.' The monk replied, 'First, prove that you can fulfill this vow.' The disciple accepted the monk's words and fell silent immediately, turning to leave the hut. Staying quiet seemed very easy to him. He managed to stay silent for one day somehow, but from the second day, the burden of not speaking started to weigh on his mind. By the third day, he began feeling heavy, and by the fourth day, a strange restlessness developed within him because all the other disciples around the monastery were talking to each other. He wanted to present his perspective to them, wanted to silence their arguments, but his vow stood in his way. So all day, he could only make faces and gestures. Days passed this way, and the disciple fell ill. His head felt like it would split open, and he lost his appetite. He only wanted to speak. He went to the monk and wrote to communicate, "Master, I want to speak. I can't breathe without speaking. I feel suffocated. I'm going mad inside. What should I do? Should I break my vow?" Reading this, the monk smiled and said, "Vows are not taken to be broken, but those who complete their vows increase their inner strength, and those who increase their inner strength progress on the path of society and awakening. Taking the vow was in your hands, and breaking it is also in your hands. Many of your brothers have broken their vows and returned to their old routines. If you can't manage, you too can break your vow and return to your old routine. But remember, if you can't handle this small vow today, how will you handle your entire life ahead? The decision is entirely in your hands." These words of the monk struck the disciple's heart. He left without speaking and confined himself to his hut, only coming out for essential tasks. The rest of the time, he stayed inside. 15 days had passed, and almost all disciples in the monastery had broken their vows, but his vow continued. He hadn't spoken a single word since taking the vow. The entire monastery was amazed at how such a talkative person could remain silent. After 15 days, he went back to the monk and wrote, "Master, I am outwardly silent, but there are many voices inside me, many screams and complaints. I keep talking internally. My mind asks various questions. While I'm quiet outside, I'm full of noise inside, "Does my vow still stand in this state?" The monk said, "Yes, your vow still stands, but as long as these voices of people ring in your ears, your mind will keep talking because it's habituated to it. You may be externally silent, but you'll keep talking internally. You need to distance yourself from these thoughts, these voices." The disciple bowed to the monk and left. The next morning, he left his hut and went towards the forest. Many days passed, the vow period ended, but the disciple didn't return. Everyone in the monastery feared that wild animals might have eaten him. Many attempts were made to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. The monk brothers had accepted that wild animals must have made him their prey, but the monk didn't think so. One day, another disciple came to the monk and asked, "Master, what might have happened to our talkative brother? Did an animal kill him?" The monk replied, "It's possible that animals made him their prey, but there could be another reason for his not returning. Perhaps he found what he went seeking." Then the disciple asked, "Master, is excessive talking so harmful?" The monk said, "One of the many sorrows in human life is that one can never stay quiet, always talking about something or the other. Half of our sorrows are created just because of our speaking. None of us wants to stay quiet. We just want to tell the other person, want to empty whatever is in our mind into their mind, want to convince them that, look, you're wrong and I'm right. This process of listening and telling continues lifelong, but in this foolishness, we lose our time, our life, our understanding, and most importantly, the precious moments that could be lived, experienced, in which joy could be attained. We lose all this, but what do we get in return? Nothing. Everything becomes worthless and wasted." The disciple asked, "Then what is the solution?" The monk replied, "Observing your thoughts with complete awareness is the only way. It's the solution to all mental problems. Working with full awareness in the present brings miraculous changes in life." After receiving answers to his questions, that disciple bowed to the monk and left. 3 months had passed since the disciple left the monastery, and there was no news of him. By now, even all the monk brothers had given up hope of his return. But one day, he came back to the monastery. However, he wasn't the same person who had left. He had returned as someone entirely different. A remarkable transformation could be felt within him. His face had an incredible stillness, and his eyes held great peace. As soon as he arrived at the monastery, all the monk brothers surrounded him and began talking. He also spoke with his monk brothers, but everyone who talked to him noticed that he was no longer hasty and talkative as before. Words came out of his mouth very thoughtfully and sweetly. After talking with the monk brothers for a while, he went straight to the monk. He touched the monk's feet and said, "Master, am I still silent? Is my vow still continuing?" The monk looked into the disciple's eyes carefully for a while and said, "Yes, you are still silent. Not a single word is coming out of your mouth, and your vow still continues." The disciple said, "Master, when I left the monastery, I was outwardly silent, but there were many voices inside me, many questions in my mind, and they wouldn't stop. So I went to the forest, hoping to find peace and reduce the chatter in my mind. But the more I went into solitude, the louder my inner voice became. I began to hear the oldest voices within me. That's when I realized how wrong I had been. When I used to speak ill of my family members, friends, and monk brothers, I thought I was right. When I would gossip about monk brothers and make fun of them, I still thought I was better than them, and that I was doing the right thing. But that day, for the first time, I realized how wrongly I spoke. These voices, these complaints continued within me for many days, but gradually, one day, all these voices within me ceased. Now I became silent internally too. In that dense forest, there was no one to speak to externally, and no voice remained inside. And that day, for the first time, I understood the true meaning of silence. There was great peace all around me. Although there were still some sounds coming that had always been there, but I couldn't hear them before. Now all those sounds were clearly audible to me. The sound of wind blowing, birds chirping, and water flowing. I heard all these sounds consciously for the first time. I had never felt such peace around me before. So to break this silence, I uttered words from my mouth for the first time. I shouted, "Oh God, what kind of peace is this? Why is everything so quiet? What has happened?" But even after my shouting, the peace wasn't disturbed. Everything was as quiet as before, both outside and inside. "Oh, Master, I talked with my monk brothers. I talked with you. I am speaking. I am walking. I am seeing everything, but inside I am completely in solitude, in silence. Even when I am in a crowd, I am alone inside, in solitude. Even when I try to make noise within myself, I remain in solitude. Now everything has become visible. Everything has become audible." The monk said, "As long as we keep speaking outwardly, there will be unrest inside. But the day we turn inward, then whatever comes out of our mouth, we will remain peaceful. Most of the evils in the world arise from our speaking because we don't want to stay quiet.